Welcome back, venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am MR, and together with Taurus, we want to talk about gameplay in VNs. But not any gameplay this time, but those times when the VNs provides a way to turn its own gameplay off. What a conundrum. Taurus, what would you say makes a VN a gameplay VN?
Yes, we've done several videos in the past about gameplay in visual novels. And that sort of thing is natural to happen when you have MR who just really enjoys playing a lot of strategy and tactics titles that involve plenty of gameplay. And then you have me, who I don't shy away from it at all in my titles. So yes, it's a common topic with us. However, first things first, I want to bring up the question of what exactly is a gameplay visual novel. Because MR, I feel like there's a distinction between saying that there is a visual novel with gameplay versus a gameplay VN. So first off, what are your thoughts?
I mean, in all honesty, it depends on who you ask, and possibly even maybe the author intent. For me, I don't really have that much distinction between those two examples. I feel as if the more expansive and maybe involved the gameplay is in a given VN, I'm more inclined to call it a gameplay VN rather than a VN with gameplay. But ultimately, I don't make the huge distinction between those two.
Okay, that's a good point. That's interesting. You have very unique ways of looking at visual novels often.
I mean, maybe that's because I'm not really adamant about VN's definition, and I'm very malleable when it comes to that topic. Yeah.
But yeah, I think I have to agree with you that it just simply comes down to author's intent and just how much of a focus there is on the gameplay. Like the standard example that I've heard for a long time is, if a visual novel fan considers Little Busters to be an acceptable level of gameplay. Because even though it's a massive visual novel that heavily relies on its text to tell us all about the characters and all of that, it still has a few segments of the gang playing baseball, where a pitcher throws the ball and you have to click or press enter or whatnot with the right timing to swing the bat, and ideally you want to get hits and hit the ball as far as you can so that you can improve your stats. And some people really take offense to this because it's a visual novel. Any sort of gameplay, even if it's minor and doesn't really affect anything, should not be existing in a medium that is suited for you to read a story. I don't know if I go that far. I do think the focus should be on reading, but I don't mind a baseball minigame like this. In fact, and to get to the meat of what we want to discuss about this episode, in certain releases, I'm pretty sure that there's even an option you can skip these baseball gameplay segments entirely. And so that adds an interesting little wrinkle, is that, well, even if a visual novel has gameplay in it, what kind of effect does it have if you can just press a button to skip the whole thing and pretend it's not there? I know, in an unrelated note, I mean, there's that Marvel Spider-Man game that came out. Well, I was about to say it came out somewhat recently, but it hasn't. That's just me getting old.
Oh my god.
But in it, there's the little mini games involved for doing the sciencey experiment stuff, and you can just press a button to skip them. Which is really funny because it's like, okay, well then why do you have these mini games if the developers have so little faith that your players will play it and enjoy it?
Oh, I mean, you remind me with that example because you brought up a game that has a mini game within it. I would go as far back as to say Mass Effect featured a skip for, I believe it was hacking or unlocking chess or something like that. You could completely skip that minigame with a press of a button. So there are other examples of a game featuring mini games that you have an ability to bypass.
And I mean, in a video game, you can at least admit that that's not the main draw. It's like if you're playing Spider-Man, it's so that you can swing through the streets and beat up the bad guys and all that fun, typical superhero stuff. And you're not doing it so that you can... you have a grid and a light beam, and you put down little angled mirrors so that you can alter the light beam to get to the goal. It's like, that's not the point. It's just supposed to be a fun little diversion. But in a visual novel, that's different, because the focus, again, is usually intended to be on the reading. That's what I would expect for any titles that are visual novels with gameplay. But then you get to some titles that seem to be gameplay VNs. And you've played several of these, right, Amar?
Yes, and I want to give you an example of something you in the past criticized, that it's not your ballpark, right? When VNs tell a story, and part of that story comes to some sort of a conflict between characters that goes down to violence, fight, or whatever, a clash of swords or martial arts. A lot of the times you say, I don't like how dragged on it is. They think about it for a million years, etc., right? So I feel like uniquely gameplay VNs or VNs with gameplay can substitute those segments by showing the conflict in a different light, that being using gameplay. So my argument, and I'm adamant in saying that, a lot of VNs with gameplay utilize the gameplay portion to enrich the story. And I know in ideal situation, what happens in that is that there exists implicit or explicit feedback loop between what happens in gameplay and what happens in the story. Sure, you can make crappy gameplay, but so you can make crappy story. So moot point. I want to say that's the intent at the very least, to have that serve a role. Okay? So with all that said, with having, that's my viewpoint established, what happens now if we take it a step further?
Well, wait a second.
The topic of today's discussion. Okay.
Wait a moment.
Fine.
You mentioned that it's your belief that visual novels will use these gameplay segments as a replacement instead of just going on long spiels about describing battles to the point of boredom, yada yada.
In ideal situation, yes.
Okay. See, that's the key part, because I'm not sure if I can think of a single title where that's actually true in a visual novel. I mean, do you know when that's ever happened?
Instead of having two people fight, you transition to gameplay, a section that is exactly that fight? Yeah, plenty.
Oh, okay. I think that's a
lot of examples.
A very video game way to handle that. I'm sure in all sorts of RPGs, of course, you get the dramatic final showdowns with the bosses, and that's when you bust out the awesome graphics and the unique attacks and the special super moves and the super difficult, dodge patterns or whatever kind of game it is. We've all played video games. We know what we're talking about in this. But a visual novel, isn't the strength supposed to be in the text? In telling the story and using the background materials?
Fine.
Yeah?
Sure, but I'm not arguing you replace everything with gameplay. I'm saying, what if the gameplay serves the role of representing that conflict? So, for example, if you take, Fallout New Vegas, the gameplay portion is that every single interaction with the game is gameplay. Even the menial task of moving around and approaching NPCs is gameplay. Whereas in VN case would be, you have story segment that is completely told by events, characters speaking, sprites, text displaying. And when it comes to clash, you transition into the gameplay segment that could, in a different way, portray that conflict instead of saying what they think and how they maneuver in combat. that's a different way of conveying that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's my stance. And as I say, ideal situation, this is how gameplay would be used. So you have a story that has tons of reading, but there comes a point in which it comes to the blows. You take your arms with the protagonist, the antagonist takes their arms, and now you duke it out in FPS. I don't know. Pick whatever genre of gameplay you want for that. And that would be my ideal way how gameplay in VNs is utilized. That's why I made a disclaimer that sure, you can make both the gameplay as and the feedback loop as. So you can make also really an interesting story. So I at least hope when we discuss it is the intent and or execution on some adequate level for this to happen. Because I cannot really defend bad gameplay or bad feedback loop in VS in which you have a disconnected gameplay. Okay, I don't like it. Okay, I'll say it outright. Screw that. And maybe there are some examples I brought today for the discussion.
Oh no.
for those.
Because yeah,
all that stuff.
Yeah, the idea of the visual novel is that you want all of its parts to feel smooth and integrated together. I mean, if you have gameplay and it immediately breaks up the flow and annoys the reader, then it's like, okay, what are you doing? Shouldn't it be good?
I would even go one step harder and say, at the very least, I would hope and pray that the VN portion is good. I would go even as far as to say that, because that's what I'm going here first and foremost, the VN with gameplay, not a gameplay with VN element, right? So I would expect at the very least the VN portion to be great. I will probably tolerate, although grumble here on the podcast about the garbage gameplay. But I would expect the VN portion to be at least engaging enough for me to persevere.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the hope. You know, we always hope that when we start a visual novel, it'll be good.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I'm sure there's some people out there who are like, okay, I've heard some bad things about this. We're going along for the ride to point and laugh. But I don't think most people want that.
Exactly, fair enough. But for the topic of today's discussion, I'm bringing the question, what happens then if the VN rooted in gameplay forgoes that gameplay? What happens if it allows that part of itself to be skipped? Does it stop being a gameplay VN and becomes just a VN? Does it become a hollow product? Does it miss some components? Does it immediately lose something that made it special? Can it even be the normal VN if the gameplay is completely skipped? That was supposed to fill the void. And maybe depending on the execution, if by skipping VNs you don't see the difference, maybe the gameplay itself was tacked on. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I prepared here a few examples of turned off gameplays. So for example, the one I wanted to bring off first and foremost to get it kind of out of the way, because it's similar to skip a scene from VN. I think a skip as a reward. So gameplay being able to be turned off as a reward for finishing VN. So this is something I've encountered when playing Baldur's Gate. This is a gameplay VN. It's focused on the gameplay portion, but once you finish the game, you have the ability to completely skip the gameplay portions. So on the initial playthrough, it is non-optional, but all subsequent playthroughs after you finish the game, you can completely skip it. So for the completion's sake, you can now blitz through the VN portions by, skipping scenes, etc., and going to the parts you haven't yet explored on the huge roadmap that they have with all the choices and branching paths.
Mm-hmm. With Baldur's Gate, it being a sci-fi mecha VN, I've heard that it has a surprisingly in-depth and robust fighting system for its gameplay, where you pilot a mech and you have a ton of skills and combos and attacks at your disposal, and you can just go to town on the enemy mecha, right?
Yes, and I believe when in the past we talked about Baldur's Sky, I didn't focus as much on the gameplay portion as you described it. Its depth of how the engine has been created, because honestly, we are VNture podcast. We talk about VNs, and I want to talk about the VN aspects that thankfully was very good. The setting in which they bound the story of a sci-fi future with the generations being more connected to the internet as a second reality, basically, was very engaging. So there's plenty to seek there, not even talking about gameplay, because the story itself is gripping, or at least that's my belief. But the gameplay portion is extensive, it is in-depth, and it is mandatory up until the point you finally finish the game. And then the reward is that you can now, on subsequent playthroughs, completely skip gameplay. So kinda works like a scene skipper in a VNs that allows you to skin scenes that you've seen before. And I'm not mentioning the control skip. I mean that some VNs give you the ability to completely transition from scene forward.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, this is the weakest example of this topic because, sure, the gameplay is mandatory for the first go around.
Yeah, this just feels like it's more of a time-saving measure for you to replay a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So I just wanted to get it out of the way that this exists. This is not the only game that has had it. That's the one that comes to my mind because probably this is the most recent read of mine. I think what is more interesting example of a tuning of gameplay is something that is an option from the very beginning. So I bring up the example of Venus Blood series. All the titles I've read in the Venus Blood series allow you to set a setting by picking I think it's the lowest difficulty setting, and then moving forward, the game acknowledges that the gameplay segment exists, but in any moment whatsoever, you can say, skip it. So the gameplay exists. So for example, how the typical playthrough and the flow is, you have a VN section, you have characters talk with each other, you have sprites, and then along the way, there comes a point in which you need to execute some sort of a plan. And Venus Blood being mostly a strategy conquest style of game that is similar to Civilization series. Not always, but that's the most common gameplay they have. Now you are presented with the gameplay portion. You are a commander of some sort of a special squad, division, whatever it may be for the given Venus Blood title. And now you have to execute the plan that you discussed beforehand in VN section. Now, with that option of skip being available in any moment during that section, it's literally in the middle of the screen. The button says skip it.
Middle of the screen. Oh, man.
Yeah, you have I think, okay, it's not on the center, it's on the middle bottom on the screen. Not in the absolute center, but in the middle, in the bottoms, you have a button that just win scenario. So ultimately, what it results in is assuming you won, you fulfill the objective, and transition into the next story segment being completely with sprites, text boxes, and all that good VN stuff. Now, the question I want to pose to you, and maybe to our listeners as well, does that cheapen the experience? Because ultimately, I would argue, part of the feedback loop and satisfaction, to be honest, is the fact that you are executing that story objective in the gameplay section. Similarly to if we were to play Murder Mystery, you are gathering clue and trying to figure out what is the case. In such a strategy game centered around I'm going to say fantasy geopolitics. Part of the fun should be engaging with that gameplay.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I mean, if the VN has a strong emphasis on its gameplay, something that is meant to take up a lot of your time and seems to have taken up a whole lot of development time, it should be good, right? It should be something that's fun, that's interesting, that maybe ties itself into the visual novel story in a few different ways. But just the idea that you could just carve it out just seems very insincere, I guess you could say.
Yes, it's just weird, and I am, how can I say it? I'm not fully certain why it's here. Maybe it is a way for people that find this kind of gameplay challenging and or too difficult to progress with the story that they feel intriguing. Sure, I'm not discounting that. So maybe that's some sort of leverage or a way to equalize if some people don't manage to fulfill and or get immersed into the gameplay. Sure, I understand maybe from that standpoint. From me, when I was preparing for this episode, in the most recent read of Venus Blood, that being Venus Blood Ragnarok, I have used this feature to bleach through the chapters I've already played. So for the completion's sake and trying to figure out all the myriad of variants, and I spoke about it when I talked in one of the reports about Ragnarok, that game features a lot of variants of regions, routes, etc., depending on your previous choices in previous chapters, what will transpire later. Given the fact this is a strategy game that takes quite a lot of time, repeated playthroughs really accumulate. So at some time, I dedicated my completionist run, so to say, to just go ahead and skip to just find those variants that I've missed. So from completionist standpoint, it's a very useful feature to have. As an option to start with to completely skip, I don't see it. I feel like, in my opinion, this cheapens the intent, even from the creator that tries to create an experience to you, the reader, and possibly I can even say to you, the player, because now we have a very weird place, whether or not you are a reader or a player, given the importance of that section. In my opinion, it cheapens the experience and the satisfaction you would derive from reading the story. But then again, there are as many opinions as there are people, as they say. And maybe just people don't vibe with the strategy, but they vibe with the setting because they think Nordic mythology is super cool. And that's the main inspiration for Venus Blood Ragnarok. And they vibe with that because, oddly enough, it's not as explored. We have myriad of VNs with anime girls being animals, but anime girls being mythological gods from Norse mythology is not as common.
That's true. I know back in the day with mobile games, if you really needed to fill up your cast, you had to go through all sorts of public domain characters as inspirations, and Egyptian and Nordic gods, Greek gods, you saw those all the time. Here's another Zeus.
Oh, gods, how many Zeuses we had. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, man. But still, I mean, do you think that's true? Do you think Venus Blood has enough pull from the story and setting and environment for someone to want to do that and just skip through all of the strategy and tactic elements? I know you said some of them. I know you said that there's a lot of opinions.
I'm trying to be unbiased, okay, because I like the series. And looking objectively, I cannot say that decisively for all of them, because some of the, let's call them out there, sci-fi, Venus Blood, crazy scientist experiment settings, probably the gameplay is too integral at that point.
Mm-hmm.
As for the series that are based on mythologies and interpretation of some other works, that being here mythos, that being the Venus Blood Frontier and Venus Blood Rock, I feel like that they have enough pull for both the inspiration from the original works and or mythologies, as well the fact that they are sequels, so they are related to each other. So if you didn't like, for example, how the Ragnarok has gameplay, but you like the first one, maybe you just want to read it because you want the sequel and you see what happens to those heroines and the setting. So I feel like some have enough pull, but I'm not as confident to say all of the Venus Blood have that pull in which the story itself can immerse you without the gameplay portion reinforcing that. Because honestly, some games, and maybe I need to name drop also Ran's games, live by the fact that characters that are involved in the story are also participating in combat, fights, etc. And how they do in that matters for their ultimate fate and having good ending or maybe bad ending, etc.
Okay, interesting.
So that's probably the most obvious example for today's episode. The option that is available from the start, in my opinion, in a lot of cases, maybe not all, it cheapens the experience by removing that feedback loop that makes the gameplay VN unique. But at the same time, I would be remiss if I were not giving you a bad example of that skip as an option. So, and it's bad twofold. So let me bring up Wayblazer Damerung that I talked about before in a different report. Oh my god, the gameplay was so ass. So it falls on a different category.
Whoops.
Probably the more popular category, honestly, because while I mostly engage with VNs with the strategy angle, I think the more popular one is the JRPG route, okay? And Wayblazer Damerung is more on the JRPG front. And boy, oh boy, they could not conjure more boring system than they did, in which you have the most menial get 10 bear asses and engage with the most boring elemental system in which no elemental is the strongest elemental system. It's just like everything that is wrong with JRPGs was there. And thankfully, maybe they knew, they allow you to skip the gameplay, although not with an I win button, but rather putting in full automation mode, basically. So the gameplay is still happening, but you don't need to click anything. It just autoplays itself. So over the course of the story, you visit what is called, I don't believe why they do it, but they call it a loser dungeon. So you need to declare yourself a loser to reduce difficulty to a baby, and the game plays itself then. So it's, in a way, they want to shame you into not engaging in the gameplay. So I don't know. It's a weird skip that is an automation in a jokey way, obviously. That it's not like changes your wallpaper on the desktop as well to a loser or something. I don't know. It's just they make poke fun of you for not engaging with the game, stamping your save point with a loser stamp. But at the same time, am I really a loser if I don't want to grind finding bear asses in the game?
Find me 20 bear asses. That's always the standard.
Yeah, that kind of. Yeah, but thankfully, by skipping the gameplay portion, you can now fully immerse yourself in the VN portion that is surely great, right? Anyway, the VN story was also us, so I don't know how I survived the Wayblazer Damerung. I definitely needed a detox after that one. So, Wayblazer Damerung represents a skip and gameplay optionality because, in my opinion, the way majority of the gameplay segments interact with story is the most redundant and unimportant way possible by creating only busy work and nothing else. Yes, you have an occasional boss fight of sorts, but it's still in the most mind-numbingly basic system and in the most boring stats get inflated so you better grind your levels kind of way that is just boring and pointless in my opinion.
So this is a time where you would enjoy or support a gameplay skip?
Definitely, yes, that's true. The full gameplay skip that isn't just an automation on I watch a cutscene, I suppose. Because that's how it turned out to be. It's hard to say, and it's kind of disheartening to say that, yes, I support gameplay skip if gameplay is us. That's not the conclusion I want to say, right? Because at that point, I don't really want to play the game.
I mean, yeah, exactly. If it's terrible, then why are you playing? Oh.
I don't know, maybe sick. There is a sickness of me trying to complete all of those.
Oh.
Okay, so that's another fun aspect of skip, and I have one more skip that I prepared that is super unique. So I want to revisit what we established. We have a VM that ties together a story portion to a gameplay that in some way showcases things from the story through whatever means there is. So I have an example of Suzukuri Kari in the Mountain, a title I've spoke about before on a report, and it is a dungeon keeper-esque tower defense strategy and management. And how it ties to the story is you're a protagonist that for some reason or another, you're otaku about dungeons. That you aren't a dungeon delver as much as you would like to manage your own dungeon. And you get roped into a shady company, and now you help them manage their dungeon as a successful business venture. Kind of like amusement park, honestly. It's very, how can I say, all ages approach to dungeons that aren't lethal as much as you have traps that boot you back to the starting zone instead of, you die in spikes. Now, why I mentioned this in this episode is skipping gameplay is part of gameplay. That's the weirdest skip I've ever found. So what I mean by that, in the story, you have a time limit, kind of like a roguelike-esque idea, that you have a limit to your playthrough, which is already weird for a VN reason, but I don't want to get into that. But over the course of repeating playthroughs to try to figure out the best choices and optimize your business venture, both through the means of communicating in VN segments with your cast of characters and recruiting more managers, more pawns, more guardsmen, etc., you get a better grasp of what you need to make it successful. And on subsequent playthroughs, you start skipping redundant options, and by proxy, you keep skipping. And I think at some point it's mandatory even to skip. The game doesn't even give you a choice. You keep skipping gameplay itself. So imagine you start a game, a normal VN, and you start from the same entry point every single time. But in Suzukari Kari in the Mountain, at some point you will keep starting, but in a later portion. I mean, more advanced, and some early character development or character dialogue stops mattering or even doesn't get mentioned or not showcased. This is something I criticize the game for. Like, in terms of canonicity, I don't like characters being developed on a new playthrough without those events transpiring, but rather being implicit, maybe happened because on previous playthroughs you've read them. That's weird to me.
I mean, on the one hand, I can understand them not wanting to waste your time, but On the other
on a
hand,
scene that you already would control skip anyway.
yeah, exactly.
I understand.
Exactly. We've already got, control skip. We've already got, skip until next choice. It's like you're taking it fully out of the reader's hands.
Exactly. That's why I was flabbergasted. Like, wait, I have to get someone trust because this is how that game progresses. I get my anime girl waifu harem of different guardsmen, and with everybody you have an affection meter. So in order to achieve a threshold for that character, I need 10 dialogue options. On subsequent playthrough, now I need only 7. What happened to the previous 3 options? Are they canon now that they always happened? Are we buddies now at the start? What happened? That's weird.
That's I don't think that's the ideal way to run things. Even regardless of gameplay and stuff.
Yeah, that was super weird. So you have skipping gameplay as a part of gameplay. That's the weirdest part. Although, at the start of this episode, you mentioned something I did not prepare. Because you mentioned skip gameplay as a result of new release. And I actually have an example of that. Because Mavlab Altered Fable had a gameplay segment, or at least mini games, I don't know how to call it. But I never knew about it. Because when I read it, it didn't have anything. When I was looking up what got cut out during the translation process, I found out that they cut out completely gameplay portions and converted some of that gameplay portion into choices. So you can imagine something akin to a map system in which you, as attacker, the protagonist of Movlov, you pick the places you want to visit, and that correlates to characters you encounter. That got converted into choices, and the gameplay portion, I think they played volleyball or something like that, got completely cut out.
Uh-oh.
I don't have any other examples in my mind of a gameplay that was so disconnected from the VN story that it could be converted back to choices and removed altogether.
Into choices.
I mean, it's an interesting answer to my question of what happens to a VN in which you remove gameplay. In this case of Love Altered Fable, you convert gameplay back to the choices because the gameplay was not conducive to the VN experience whatsoever.
Brutal,
yeah. That's true. I didn't think about that. So thanks for bringing that example.
Well, there is a whole wide world of visual novels out there with all sorts of different types and flavors and variations, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that you could just skip a giant element of what you put into your game, it's intriguing to put it nicely.
Yes, and at some point I wonder, is that even an author intention? And if so, is it an intention of a creator as in programmer, but maybe not so much as a script writer? Because I assume majority of VNs are not solo projects, right? So, yeah. It's something to think about.
Yes, thank you,
at the very
everyone.
least, naively, I hope gameplay matters and has a place. I may have been proven wrong multiple times in the past.
Oh, sometimes you come around on the gameplay. That's nice.
Yeah, true. So there's silver lining. Okay.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you all enjoyed, and let us know if there's any gameplay VNs that either you could skip, or you didn't want to skip, or your own thoughts about the topic.
Exactly. Give us all your hot takes in the comments, and with that, venture out.
Venture out.